Kalispera se όλους. My name is Spiridoula Dimitriou, and on behalf of the Greek Orthodox community of Melbourne and Victoria, it is my great pleasure tonight to warmly welcome you to the Culture and History Seminar, our usual Thursday night seminar during the year. Tonight, it's an online-only event, and it will be the same for the next two following seminars. I would like to begin by saying that the Greek Centre respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands upon which it resides, the Burun, Wurrung and Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pays respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend gratitude to Spiros Charambanis and the Ithacan Philanthropic Society for their donation tonight that makes tonight's seminar possible. Many thanks are also extended to the following corporate sponsors for the seminar program, these being Delphi Accounting, Symposiac Wines, and the Castellorian Association of Victoria. On this, the 100th anniversary of the composer's birth, our speaker tonight, Dr. Maria Athanasiou, will present the topic of Mikis Theodorakis and the Greek art folk song. Dr. Athanasiou is a lecturer at Newcastle University and a researcher at Durham University. Her award-winning work focuses on the pedagogical methodologies and assessment across the educational board, popular music performance, and the interpretation as well as activism, social entrepreneurship, and digital business in the creative industries and beyond. Tonight, Dr. Athanasiou is addressing us from Ioannina in Greece. Dr. Athanasiou holds a PhD in musicology and has been awarded a Newcastle University Alumni Achievement Award, that being in 2021, was a finalist in the Music and Drama Education Awards in 2023 and the Shinspires Awards in 2023 and 24. She is a member of the British Academy Early Career Researcher Network and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Tonight's topic, the art folk song, is a genre that creates a musical setting for a poem or text. Among the finest of Theodorakis' music was that written for traditional poems. Tonight, Dr. Athanasiou will enlighten us regarding the musicological and cultural issues in Greek popular music and look at the category of the lament, which is a revered form and plays an important social role in Greek culture. Dr. Athanasiou will analyse the stylistic and formal features as well as the differences in this music's morphological structures and examine the social and cultural influences over Theodorakis' work. And now I hand you over to our speaker, Dr. Athanasiou. Good evening and thank you.
Good evening and good morning at the same time. It is an honor to be among you and thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this series of seminars. Special thanks goes to Simela, Nick Dallas, the president, Spiridoula, and of course Kostas, who is the unsung hero that makes sure everything runs smoothly in such sessions. As Spiridoula said, this seminar coincides with Theodorakis' year as declared by the Greek Ministry of Culture and also addresses questions of aesthetics, tracing the dissemination of the Greek dirge beyond the country through the text translations, recording circulation, concerts, arrangements, and new instrumentations, which seem to acquire a metacultural presence that brings these culturally specific expressions of grief before a broader listenership and transforms them into a universal human experience of sorrow and empathy. Mikis Theodorakis was a renowned Greek composer, lyricist, and author who has tirelessly elaborated on a plethora of musical styles, genres, and techniques, ranging from symphonic works and chamber music to cantatas, oratorios, hymns, ballet, operas, songs, and song cycles, as well as theatrical and film music. He received international awards and global recognition, both for his musical contribution and political stance, among them the BAFTA Award for Best Film Score in 1970, the Lenin Peace Prize in 1983, the International Music Prize by the UNESCO International Music Council in 2005, and the Legion of Honor in France in 2007. He was an honorary member of the Academy of Athens and had received honorary doctorate degrees by nearly all Greek universities, as well as the University of Quebec and the University of Zabuk. His career began in early 40s when he was studying at the Athens Conservatoire, although his childhood memories had a great impact on his later development as he was moving from Italy into Syros and Icaria to Crete due to his father's frequent displacements, who was a civil servant. During the 40s and 50s, Greece was a country financially and socially drained by the Second World War, with very restricted possibilities for rapid recovery. The totalitarianism of fascist occupation had caused political, military, economic, and social turbulence, which erupted into the 1944 Decembriana events, which were a succession of battles around Athens, and the ensuing Greek Civil War. This conflict between communist and non-communist parties dated back to 1943 and was intensified in autumn 1944 after German forces' withdrawal from Greece and after the percentages agreement between Winston Churchill and Stalin, which divided the Balkans into Western and Soviet spheres of influence, with Greece in the Western sphere. As Mouyis notes, this war is considered to be one of the most devastating events in modern Greek history and is seen as a wound to the nation's past. Important shifts in Greek musical life had already taken place between the wars. During the 20s, the relocation of refugees from Asia Minor had already brought rebetiko tragoudi, namely rebetiko song, into the music scene, where it was first embraced by marginalized social groups. European music was becoming increasingly familiar among the interwar era's bourgeoisie, and the so-called elafro tragoudi, namely the light song, was the peculiar musical genre of a deferred Belle Epoque in Greece, which was the only genre of popular music to be accepted by the state and the middle classes before the wars. The Greek National School of Music had also been founded with the establishment of the Hellenic Conservatoire in 1919 and the National Conservatoire in 1926, aiming to represent a conscious and consistent collaboration among Greek composers to create a musical language with a national character. At its beginning, the school sought to set its musical basis on traditional Greek music, and more particularly on the Demotiko tragoudi, namely the folk song, and the Byzantine hymns as nationally considered high artistic elements. Following the example of the corresponding European schools, it tried to establish these forms in the Greek context, and its presence was also evident in the press, usually in newspapers and journals, as they were employing every possible way to promote and support the Greek musical idea. According to Hardas, the Greek National School was the principal agent of Greek music over the first half of the 20th century, while the music of the Ionian Islands of the 19th century and the gradual advent and institutional establishment of modernist and later postmodernist idioms in post-1950 Greece were also integral parts of the Greek musical landscape. One particular musical idiom of the second half of the 20th century, with several postmodernist musical qualities, became the endechno laiko tragoudi, namely the art folk song. Coming to the forefront in the late 50s, the contemporary laiko tragoudi embraced the internal poetic production, which was internationally recognized for its remarkable quality, and proposed a quite unique dialogue between popular musical idioms and the modernist poetry of the 30s. As this tendency began to cascade within the Greek cultural landscape, it started shaping the genre of endechni laiki musiki, namely the art folk music, as well as the art folk song. They initially had two main protagonists, the composers Manos Hatzidakis and Mikis Theodorakis. Hatzidakis established one aesthetic approach towards this genre by orchestrating part of Brecht's The Caucasian Chalk Circle in 1945 to 1948, while Theodorakis set Yannis Ritsous's poem Epitaphios to music in 1958, turning the attention towards domestic rather than international artistic production. Although Hatzidakis' endeavors were inspired by a German theatrical text, Theodorakis' choice to work with a poet of domestic affairs, just a second, oh, turned the attention to the domestic production. As a musical term, and according to Beaton and Tragaki, endechno laiko tragoudi characterized those song compositions that were based on achieved published poetry. If seen technically, it essentially contains two apparently contradictory concepts of high art by the word endechno and common culture by using the word laiko, that demonstrate quite eloquently an amalgamation of the Greek folk tradition with a Western orientation. Tsiolakis also finds the musical terminology rather paradoxical and describes the genre as the art folk song of Greece that was originally invented largely by the leftist intellectuals in urban Greece, prominent among whom was Mikis Theodorakis. For Theodorakis, the endechno laiko tragoudi was actually regarded as a contemporary composite work of art that could be creatively assimilated by the masses, denoting its political and historical character. His efforts were mostly based on the dialogue of music and poetry, and Epitaphios was the greatest example of a marriage between the contemporary Greek music and the contemporary Greek poetry, as he used to say. Epitaphios epitomized the genre of endechno laiko tragoudi by combining the poetic lament of leftist Yannis Ritsos with laika musical features, primarily the use of bouzouki and the rebetiko singer. Its release in 1960 was a critical point in contemporary Greek popular song and made Theodorakis into a composer, starting a cultural revolution by trying to redefine the laiko genre within the broader umbrella of popular music through an amalgamation of music, poetry, and the fight for democracy. As a Western-educated composer with leftist ideas, he aimed to create a genre that would familiarize the working class with contemporary poetry, which would also incorporate Pan-Hellenic folk musical idioms, free from references to particular regions. Since its birth, the endechno laiko tragoudi has embraced the internal poetic production, which was internationally recognized for its remarkable quality. The dissemination of these works around the globe sets a basis for critical thinking about their musico-poetic substance and consecrated nature, as Bourdieu would put it. Since when this tendency began to stream within the Greek cultural landscape, it shaped the genre of endechnylaki musiki as already noted. Thereby, it is not only how far these works have gone, but it is also worth taking a closer look at the eternal attitude where this musical genre was born. Among the vectors that propelled this propensity, there were three principal cultural and aesthetic means that helped set it up. First, the use of song cycles, which were primarily based on the work of Greek poets and lyricists. Secondly, the establishment of the laikos τραγουδιστής, namely the popular singer, and the laiko musical instrument, namely the bouzouki, as the original expressors of the poetic meanings, and thirdly, the laiki synablia, namely the popular concert, that provided a new means of direct communication with the audience in either distinct open spaces or specifically designated settings that could accommodate the best possible and massive participation of an audience. The endechnylako τραγούδι thus differentiates itself from the folk genre on grounds of lyrics, instrumentation, and style. Its character is more Western orientated in terms of compositional techniques, but there is no direct relationship with the romantic and meta-romantic form of lied that one could assume. On the contrary, it occupies a particular place within the Greek cultural soundscape, as it has opened a window to the previously marginalized genre of rebetiko τραγούδι and borrowed several musical techniques from the Greek National School of Music in terms of compositional elaboration, especially its inclination towards modality and the employment of folk features. This interesting and rather constructive blend of musicocultural worlds could explain to a certain extent the wide acceptance it has received from the Greeks themselves during the second half of the 20th century. Since the totalitarian suppression of the dictatorship between 1967 and 1974 also played a significant role in its dissemination, the endechnylako τραγούδι also served as a means of resistance, and it still seems challenging how it manages to resonate within the current Greek sociocultural context, not only in a recalling act of the past, but mainly as an ever-growing need of expression. Springing up from a long-standing tradition and being inspired by the form of lament, the endechnylako τραγούδι, apart from its text, also gets its unique character from its music, where each melodic line has a key role to play. In the case of contemporary Greek laments that belong to the endechnylaka τραγούδια, the melody seems to be primarily tonal, major or minor as we say in music, in contrast with the melodic development of the folk forms, which moves almost exclusively on modal roots. This does not mean, though, that there are no influences between these two genres, since, as Theodorakis underlines, the contemporary song, with due regard to its laiki version, has its roots in the Byzantine hymns, the folk songs of the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor, and the Greek folk songs in general that use microtonal intervals and modal passages. However, again, according to the composer, the Greek endechnylako τραγούδι does not have any freedom to develop its melodic line in the same way as it is constructed in stricter musical forms, leaving little space for improvisation or musical spontaneity. Looking at one of his sketches, the Byzantine chant is placed on the top of his pyramid as the principal spring of inspiration, connected with the ecclesiastiki musiki, namely the ecclesiastical music, at the left back bottom, the δημοτικό τραγούδι, namely the folk song of the rural areas of Greece at the center, and the μικρασιατική musiki, namely the music of Asia Minor at the right front bottom. The later two musical realms meet their common point at the Anatolie, Orient, which emerges from the Byzantium as a three-dimensional pill, while on the other side of this depiction, Theodorakis seems to indicate the external influences of the Greek song during the first half of the previous century. Particular reference is also made to Italy, which nourished the song of the Ionian Islands, which, along with the Bavariki musiki, the Bavarian music, during King Otto's government, shaped the Athenian cantata. As he explains in his notes, the Athenian cantata was the culmination of the Greek laiko tragoudi that appeared in the mid-19th century. The restrictions of the laiko tragoudi in the 19th century, due to the Ottoman occupation, seem to be applied later to the endechno laiko tragoudi, especially in terms of rhythm, as there does not appear to be a great rhythmic variety either. On the contrary, the Greek endechno laiko tragoudi is usually in accordance with two or three major common dances that have folk origins and are closely connected with the Orient: the Hassapikos dance in 4/4 or 2/4, the Hassaposervikos dance in 2/4, and the Rebetiko dance in 9/8. The harmony that underpins the melody of an endechno laiko tragoudi is mainly based on three specific and principal chords: the first, the fourth, and the fifth, or as we say in music, the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant, while the modulations appear relatively rarely. Thanks to Theodorakis' music activity, though, and his contribution to the development of melodic songs, the Greek song evolved in such fields of folk music, which managed to acquire those special attributes that gave it the laikos character, as a blend of tonal and modal features based on principal chords, while when it comes to laments, the harmony gets enriched with the second and the third chords in an attempt to underline the feelings of sorrow. Nonetheless, the composer confesses that if, within the general song framework, one excludes the particular interpretative means of laika songs, namely the laiki orchestra and the laikos tragoudistis, the element that shapes the character of the contemporary Greek song is ultimately its melodic line. As a result, one could say that the rhythm and harmony exist just to support and enhance the melodic elaboration in a rather colorless and impersonal way. Theodorakis has also underlined that the majority of the melodies of contemporary laiki music had been deployed in the ascending minor scale, where the gravity center is found on the dominant chord rather than the tonic. Even if the laiki melody moves to one or two notes above or below this chord, it usually goes around it, looking for strength and pulse to unfold again. Some composers, such as Mikis Theodorakis, Manos Hatzidakis, and Stavros Xerxakos, as well as poets, for example, George Seferis, Yannis Ritsos, Odysseas Elitis, and Nikos Gatsos, started to study and present the music and language of contemporary Greece as two interconnected disciplines. Their structuralistic approach and their systematic investigation led to their aesthetic appreciation and assimilation within the Greek cultural field. As Mario Vitti observes, there is no doubt that a change took place around the 30s, where ruptural tendencies with the past and reflections in favor of new consciousness had been broadly discussed. This initially literal movement was based on educational cultivation and spiritual refinement, much deeper than previously known. Thanks to this artistic movement, several works produced at that time ended up having a great resonance for the Greeks, even though in terms of poetic and musical complexity, there was a general sense that they were relatively inaccessible by the broader community, and only educated people could understand them. However, their setting into music, along with the issues they addressed, reached a wider audience and set the basis for a cultural revolution that embraced all social strata and backgrounds. For the wider public and researchers, the generation of the 30s gained an almost mythical dimension since it found the momentum to bring new life into the Neo-Hellenic culture. Kokonis underlines that this generation is marked by the desire to renew the field of modern Greek intellectual production by embracing modernity without losing its Greekness, whichever the apprehension of the latter may be. In other words, and according to his views, it tried to maintain a balance between two sides. First, it endeavored to show to his European contemporaries a cosmopolitan face that is extrovert, modern, productive, and competitive, but which, on the other hand, does not turn away from its tradition and its original expressive forms, the so-called sense of Greekness. It was thus within this generation that the Laiko song and έντεχνο Laiko τραγούδι appeared, when Theodorakis, as Yanari states, was meant to become the interpreter of what they were, meaning the Greeks, and at the same time the prophet of what they might become in all spheres, politically and culturally. Particularly when he is no profound social thinker, no great linguist, or rather a rather innocent politician. He is not only a superb musician, but a musician capable of using modern techniques to give life to tradition and to bring a social, cultural, musical, and political revolution through his oeuvre. Epitaphios has been a striking example of the establishment of the song cycles in contemporary Greek music, but its appearance and significance was not limited thereto, as the concept of laiki synablia, namely the popular concert, was also inaugurated by its setting to music. This new musical feature constituted a particular sociocultural occurrence within contemporary Greek song, where the bouzouki and interpreters from the rebetiko context were accepted on a more serious and refined basis. In other words, the notion and experience of what popular represented previously in Greece now moved away from the taverns, clubs, or radio broadcasts, and the general audience was called upon to listen to laiki musiki in open spaces and prestigious concert halls. Thereby, formerly highly regarded music gained significant ground with the public since it was brought directly to them. Theodorakis confesses, "With the concert, I wanted at the outset to destroy the curse of the ban, to get close to the people, into the neighborhood, into the countryside." This kind of uninterrupted and reciprocal communication took vital dimensions through Theodorakis' and Hatzidakis' orchestrations on Epitaphios, which, as Mougis underlines, apart from the musicological questions, they also address the re-experience of the existing sociocultural identities. As a means of popular performance, the laiki synablia was also a way for Theodorakis to protest against the official prohibition of his works. His underground activities and leftist ideas have on several occasions challenged the alternating Greek governments, which, following the release of Epitaphios and the huge appeal it had for the general public, they had ordered on the one hand radio stations to remove his songs from any of their broadcasts, and on the other, the police removed his discs from the jukeboxes of that time. This manipulation scandal made the Greek people and mostly the younger generation stand stand by the composer and propagate his works widely in taverns and public spaces through tape recorders. They also asked him to record a statement in order for customers to listen to it each time they visited any such place. As Theodorakis was arrested, condemned twice to death, remained under house arrest several times, exiled in Zatuna, and detained at Oropos prisons, his music was deemed to revive political passions and causing discord among citizens, but he did not cease to protest and compose music. As he confessed, "I am imprisoned, like a wild beast, a criminal, or a songbird." This movement penetrated the generic contemporary lyco-musical context and was transformed into a new type of dialogue between the composer and the wider audience, establishing the concept of the popular concert, or lykeisynablia in Greek. As an open performance consisting of lyka τραγούδια, it was a means of unification and resistance both for Theodorakis and the Greek people, which however caused political upheavals across the country, when several theatres in small villages, towns and cities hosted such public performances, and the authorities had first hindered them and then attacked them. However, the composer had a strong public presence, and through his writings, he depicted the role of the artist and his relationship with the public. For the Greece of the 60s, there was a great lack of organization with regard to musical performances that deprived the audience of a systematic and adequate musical nourishment, while the absence of aesthetic appreciation did not allow the appropriate channeling of contemporary Greek music to reach a wider audience. On the contrary, the aesthetic chaos that existed prevented the overt communication of any artistic work and obliged the artists to confine themselves in order to protect their creations, since the abstractive choices of the official state did not give enough space for essential deep relationships to be developed further on. Theodorakis describes artist and public, the real one, not a selected one, need to be in a face-to-face communication. This kind of contact often gives the sense of vertigo and the flavor of an absolute joy. We will be back soon, and I hope we will be more, as we believe that the most concise way to better understand ourselves, our art, and our time goes through the most distant villages of our country. At the same time, this type of concert added further waves of changes into an era that has just arisen from its ashes. The renegotiation and maybe straightforward challenge of the conventional social bias were reinforced even more by Theodorakis' attitude in supporting the cultural revolution, which has always been the quintessence of any social change. I wanted the Greek people who embraced my songs to progress on the basis of their love for songs, beginning with them and advancing to new musical forms. Forms which, apart from the voice and lyka instrument, would contain new sound colors. For example, choirs and symphonic instruments, as well as new musical techniques like harmony, counterpoint, and orchestration. In other words, we veered towards symphonic forms of music relying on songs and more widely on poetry set to music, which would secure the interest and the dynamic participation of the people in the 60s. Don't forget, for the Greeks, the listening and singing of the words of great poets in their everyday life was and remains an important step itself in the Greek people's conquest of high art that is purely Neo-Hellenic in content, character, and form. Although he was a gifted composer for the Europeans, his ambition was to be tested by the audience of his own country, spreading his music around Greece and feeling the pulse of its people. As a result, the Lycidian of Leia took on a symbolic dimension for him to bear witness by his compatriots towards a moral victory of the highly democratic and humanistic spirit of the Greeks. Official prohibitions, on the other hand, added some external layers to his vision, confirming that the artistic route he had chosen to follow was the right one and could become the compass for a cultural upheaval. His venture then began with Epitaphios, a lament of contemporary Greek poetry and an artistic form that carried on a long-standing tradition. Before I start saying some things about two of his song cycles, Epitaphios and Το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδερφού, I need to issue a trigger warning as both song cycles deal with quite sensitive topics, so please take care of yourselves. Epitaphios is a poem written by Yannis Ritsos in a 15-syllable and rhymed verse. In its preface, Ritsos informs the reader what inspired his poem, namely Thessaloniki's 1936 demonstrations, where tobacco factory workers went on a long-term strike, asking for wage increases and improved benefits from the tobacco insurance fund, as well as their political and trade union freedoms. On the 9th of May 1936, and after several days of turbulence across the city, the gendarmerie attacked the protesters and the strikers defended themselves with bricks and stones. The real battle had just begun. As soon as the police approached the nearby buildings, the strikers set fire to them and the driver Tassos Tousis fell dead. He was 25 years old and the first striker to be killed. His murder lent a strong sense of purpose to the general demonstration. The battle lasted for 4 hours and counted 9 dead and 300 injured people. This heartbreaking picture that you see on your screens was published on the front page of the Greek newspapers and traveled across the country. At the bottom, it shows Katina, Tassos' mother, beside the dead body of her assassinated son during those strikes, whose companions had laid him on a wooden door in order to carry him away from the turbulence taking place in the city. Yannis Ritsos was deeply moved by the depiction of the tragedy, and within 3 days he wrote his lament, as he believed it would be sung by Katina during those sorrowful moments. Epitaphios is a mother's lament who, down on her knees, mourned her boy in front of the gendarmes and other protesters. The 44 verses of this poem were first published in the Athenian newspaper Rizosπάστης on the 12th of May 1936 as Myroloi, which in Greek means dirge or lament. It was dedicated to the heroic workers of Salonika, but later that year, Ritsos revised and expanded the work, renaming it Epitaphios. However, it was 20 years later that he sent it to Theodorakis, who was then living in a small apartment in Paris, as in the meantime, the dictatorship of Ioannis Metaxas had banned its circulation due to Ritsos' leftist political ideas. Within a multifarious web of musical productivity, as Theodorakis' musical galaxy indicates, Epitaphios was set to music in 1958 during a time of intensive creative activity and incorporated miscellaneous elements from different compositional techniques that Theodorakis had already employed up to that point. For example, he had already composed his Third Symphony, a part of which was then channeled to his Third Suite. His First and Second Symphonies, his 3 ballets, and the concerto for piano, the 2 sonatinas for violin and piano, the sonatina for solo piano, and the finale of his piano concerto. His dedication to Western forms of musical production had hitherto overwhelmed his work, when he decided to leave them aside and concentrate on another form that would come both as a contradiction and emanating outcome of his compositional preoccupations thus far. When he received Epitaphios in 1958, he spontaneously started to write music for the poem without having any need or even intention to do so. The outcome of such an inspiration was a work of Laiki music, where Theodorakis also followed the same process with Ritsos, who, while writing, tried to become and represent any Laikos poet or Merning mother. As a result, Epitaphios emanated from 2 personalities directly intertwined with the experiences and events that took place in Greece during the 20th century, and who both tried to embrace the majority of the Greek people and become their Laiki muse. According to Theodorakis, and in terms of musical setting and poetic structure, Epitaphios is the meeting point of the lament of Mani, the cantata of Zakynthos, the rebetiko song of Crete, the modal and rhythmic features of the folk songs of the Aegean Sea, and the ecclesiastical melodies. In its own right, Epitaphios became a milestone and turning point not only of the composer's attitude, but thanks to the elements it contains as a musico-poetic form, it also inflamed the new genre of the Greek έντεχνα λαϊκά τραγούδια, and its appearance paved the way for the musical and cultural revolution destined to take place in Greece during the 60s. According to Theodorakis' notes and explanations, here you have some tangible evidence of his influences. You see how the melodic lines from a maniatico lament are infused within Epitaphios or from a Smyrneiko τραγούδι, as well as a critico rebetiko. These are all melodic influences found in the songs of Epitaphios, while we also have other juxtapositions with ecclesiastical melodies, as for example the Δόξα εν ύψισθις Θεῷ, Glory to God in the highest heaven hymn, with στο παραθύρι στεκόσουν, which is included in the poem of Epitaphios. Moreover, we also have notes and evidence from the composer himself about juxtapositions between τον νυμφώνω σου βλέπω, I see thy bridal chamber, and how it has influenced Epitaphios' song. Theodorakis recognized the wealth of the Greek musical tradition and was able to treat the resources of the European classical legacy in order to produce a work that would express his compatriots. Like Ritsos, he was also inspired by the ecclesiastical form of Epitaphios Thrinos, and both the composer and the poet started from a common point of reference that was rather familiar to the audience as well. Epitaphios established this new genre as it combined Neo-Hellenic poetry with folk instruments, performance of the rebetiko song, and melodic features of folk and Byzantine music. Taken from different parts of Greece and from different historic periods, these elements were brought together to form a musical and cultural structure that could speak across social strata and demolish any pre-existing boundaries. Given through Western art techniques, but in an almost vernacular way, this combination of musical components aspired to appeal to a broader audience and to have a strong impact on it. As the lament that induced the art folk song, Epitaphios paved the path for a conscious reconceptualization of the cultural identity of Greeks, but it also created a series of tensions among musicologists and society that deserve attention in order to understand how it redefined the basis of aesthetics within the laiko genre. The release of Epitaphios seemed to resist against the forgetfulness of the Greeks by vibrating their own memory, revealing its significance in particular works and circumstances. Epitaphios evoked their mimi, their recollection, through actual facts, challenging the comfort zones of the officially patronized cultural milieu. Surprisingly enough, its author's desire to reconceptualize and recontextualize this experience proved to be more than welcome for the Greek people themselves when Theodorakis, despite the prohibitions, launched performances in stadia throughout Greece in order to bring his music before greater audiences. His intrinsically artistic impudence was broadly and positively received by the wider public and started to shape a new identity by making listening, sharing, and experiencing music and poetry of the recent past. The poem Epitaphios contains the recounting of deep emotions. The mother's mourning of the assassinated worker resembles the lament of Helen, Hecuba, and Andromache that mourn the dead Hector in Iliad. It also resonates with Hecuba's lament in The Trojan Woman, and Hecuba or Andromache's lament in Andromache of Euripides, as Theodorakis describes. His juxtapositions can make a reader trace his influences by the ancient tragedy, as at the time he was composing Epitaphios, he was also elaborating on his symphonic works and ballet, Antigone, Oedipus Tyrannos, and Phenice. However, Epitaphios is the lament of any mother who loses her child, where the ancient epic and tragic poetry seem to meet in the wretchedness of the Thessaloniki strikes to talk about the happy days that have passed, appraise the dead man as if he is still alive, and despise death that humiliates the natural law. The emotional listening to and experience of music usually emanates from negative feelings rather than from joyfulness and leads to a massive catharsis, both for the protagonists and the listeners themselves, evoking the confession of their unhappiness that reconciles them and reinforces their social independence. Crystallizing an instance of an objective expression of gratification, as Adorno has put it, the mother in Epitaphios and the song cycle as such recalls the layers of consciousness of the people, verifies the fact that one who weeps does not resist any more than one who marches, and lays the groundwork for the genre of laiki tragedy that follows. Thanks to Epitaphios, Theodorakis realized how the laiko song could reverberate throughout society, unite the Greeks, and be transformed into movements and emotions. Through το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού, however, he created a work that took shape in faces and persons with a specific attitude towards life, who follow their fate. Their configuration seemed to be driven by the norms of the modern mythology, as he called it, which is fundamentally full of historical, social, cultural, and empirical antitheses throughout its course. Tracing contemporary history along with its facts and symbols that were familiar to the Greeks, he treated the ancient Greek tragic poets, the folk and demotiko τραγούδι, namely the song of the 12th century onwards, in such a way that the words and deeds narrated in το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού had been widely known for years. Το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού is a song cycle which invited a reappraisal of the Greek notion of popular music, crystallizing Theodorakis' significance for Greek musicology and popular music studies, and providing comparisons with other socially and politically engaged uses of popular music in the Balkans and beyond. Recounting the atrocities that had taken place during the Greek Civil War between 1946 and 1949, as witnessed by Theodorakis himself and his fellows, το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού emerged as a deeper need to create a work that would be based on separate songs and would share some common grounds with Epitaphios in terms of structure and texture. Theodorakis had played an active role as a communist during the Greek Civil War, especially in the underground resistance movement, and his political involvement had led him to be arrested and exiled several times. In this song cycle, his lived experience addresses nuances of ethnoethnography in composition, providing an illustrative testimony of that strife through the composer's lens, observational understanding, and personal participation. With a clear political purpose, the cycle indicates that the contemporary laiko τραγούδι comes from the people themselves and has the potential to depict their historical presence and political stance. In narrating the Greeks' sufferings during the Greek Civil War, Theodorakis' tragic characters add layers from his own experiences, the struggle, tortures, imprisonments, and exile, and they carry a particular poetic symbolism. They address meaningful juxtapositions with the ancient genre of tragedy and its political underpinning in terms of multivocal democracy, sovereignty, freedom of speech, intergenerational justice, and equity. Theodorakis worked on the song cycle for more than a year. He first began in 1960, when he wrote its first song, Ένα δειλινό, it was first performed in Athens in 1962. Psychologically influenced by the Greek Civil War, the composer had developed a myth of contemporary Greece in which the Civil War was the greatest tragedy in the history of Hellenism, as Logothetis underlines, where the Greek people were seen to be crucified and were seeking resurrection. For Theodorakis, each song in το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού constituted a complete and self-contained story with its own characters, symbols, and inherent action, which converged towards one common direction and composed a bigger narrative. His initial schematic idea was based on the interplay of his myth about the Greek Civil War, the people involved, and the presence of music. As such, the form of a song cycle seemed to enhance his potential to portray their social engagement, creative conflicts, and self-critical movements more eloquently. He initially included 9 songs, among which 8 were written and composed entirely by him. Απρίλης, το όνειρο, the dream, κοιμήσου αγγελούδι μου, the lullaby, η αλυσίδα, the chain, ένα δειλινό, at sunset, προδομένη μου αγάπη, my betrayed love, τον Παύλο και τον Νικολιό, the 2 main protagonists, στα περβόλια, in the orchards, and το ξαστικό, Gloria. The lyrics of the lullaby were written by Kostas Virvos. Thinking back of his experiences during the dark period of the Greek Civil War and remembering Behan's 1958 play The Hostage about political violence in Ireland, which also employed live music, Theodorakis imagined 2 friends who were lost in places of death but were keen to talk to each other, Pavlos and Nikolios. The first name was initially meant to describe Pavlos Papamercuriou, with whom Theodorakis had lived in 1948, when the composer was indicted for his illegal and underground wartime activities as a young communist during the war. Nikolios was an imaginary character meant to personify Pavlos' comrade. In Theodorakis' mind, the young communist Pavlos also had an older brother, Andreas, who supported the political right party and had been killed in the anti-communist National Army. Their mother would be trying to reconcile the two opposing sides, the right and the left, as happened in many families during the Civil War. At the end of the story, both brothers die. Andreas is killed in the battle at the peak of that feud, while Pavlos, unintentionally betrayed by his girlfriend Ismene, is also killed in an attempt to save her father's life. Expressing without hesitation that the cycle's purpose was mostly political, with a social and pedagogical lens, Theodorakis underlined. At crucial times for a nation, I believe that the true artist should be preoccupied with works and actions that will directly be of great assistance to solve any existing problem, to find the way out. I believe that the only way to win the battle in front of history and culture is, for the time being, the outspoken unity, not a conventional, deliberate, and purposeful unity as a matter of tactics, but the unity of all the Greeks. Although the song "Η Αλυσίδα" had to pass through the unpleasant route of prohibitions and was eventually removed from the song list, the first recording of this song cycle was made in October 1962 at Studio Columbia in Athens, and the performance was approved for legal distribution as a disc. Surprisingly, and despite the official outcry towards Theodorakis' work, even from EDA, the United Democratic Left, the song cycle ended up warmly welcomed by the Greeks. Theodorakis later added some further songs he deemed important for the story, such as the monologue for Charos, which personifies death, and songs about the roles of mothers, but none of them was ever released in an album due to the censorship his overall work underwent during the junta of colonels. "Η Αλυσίδα" was eventually added back to the song cycle 20 years later, when democracy was restored in Greece, and it only gained its full shape in 1980 to 1981, when it was presented for a second time under Alexis Solomos' direction at the Athenian Theatre in Athens. Musically, the cycle's orchestra consists of two bouzouki and two laiki singers, who recount the plot of the story and represent the people, the laos, throughout history. There is constant interaction between them during drama, and as George Yannaris notes, the musical instruments and the singers symbolize the permanent axis around which all peoples and nations turn. They become characters on stage. As the play progresses, the character often asks the popular singers for advice or assistance. The laiki orchestra plays the role of the eye and the soul, the voice and memory of the people and of history. The cycle's theatrical version is divided into two main sections, the prologue and the act. In the first part, the orchestra plays the role of the chorus, while the singers either represent the characters or just recite events. The audience shares a silent participation in the narrative, which reflects a presentational performance and creates an antithesis between the living spectators and the near-to-death characters who are on stage. During the act, the chorus enters, but neither it nor the orchestra takes any part in the action. Instead, they are replaced by masks and instruments hanging on the wall. Only the sounds of the santuri, namely the dulcimer, the clarinet and the bouzouki ensemble are heard, Theodorakis explains. The popular instruments were transformed into holy cherubims of a new religion. Along with the stage and the hanging masks, the singers and musicians became an invisible chorus which expressed with wisdom and passion the general status quo of the city, the polis, of the laos of the time. Just like the ancient Greeks and the Persians, they, the invisible chorus, also had the same relationship with the work that they watched and heard. They had lived it. It was theirs. In some way they had taken part in its birth. He wonders, though, whether the choral song of the past is a contemporary Laiko song. Since it is difficult to overtly support such an idea, he underlines that for him, the ancient Greek tragedy defines the peak of the human intellect. Aeschylus's and Sophocles' choral songs of the 5th century BCE are considered to be sublime forms of artistic expression, while for Theodorakis, the contemporary Laiko song comes from the people themselves and has the potential to provide evidence of a historical continuity of singing down the years. According to his arguments, which tend to interrelate rather than compare these two singing genres, although the people and facts come and go, the song remains the same. Imbued with any common contemporary tragedy, it assumes a testimonial nature. The song and the Laiko singer together encapsulate the quintessence of any pan-Laiki and nationwide idea through the centuries, as happens with a shared language that connects people. For Theodorakis, this multitudinous invisible chorus that expresses the general status quo of the city, of the laos of the time, with wisdom and passion, could trace its relevance to the new German school of music and the thinking of Richard Wagner, where the chorus represented a potentially idealized form of the voice of das Volk, namely the people. Since for ancient Greeks, public art was the expression of the deepest and noblest principles of the people's consciousness, and the Greek tragedy was the entry of the artwork of the people upon the public arena of political life, flourishing for just so long as it was inspired by the spirit of the people, it is apparent why Theodorakis dreamed of expressing a contemporary Laiki tragedy through this song cycle. Much influenced by Gramsci's teachings about the creation of a revolutionary folk culture, Theodorakis' own agenda on cultural nationalism is also reflected in the Song of the Dead Brother, where he employed the endechno Laiko τραγούδι as a means to mirror Greek antiquity and composed a form that could find similarities with the ancient genre of tragedy. It seems thus that in an attempt to create a dialogue between these two genres, he aligned his cultural creativity with the political use of his work. Although Theodorakis had already realized that in composing Epitaphios, the Laiko song could reverberate throughout society, unite the Greeks, and be transformed into movements and emotions, το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού represented a further step in his political engagement through music. With this song cycle, he created a work that took shape in faces and persons with a specific attitude towards life. Their configuration seemed to be driven by the norms of what he called modern mythology. filled with historical, social, cultural, and empirical antitheses throughout its course. Inspired by the ancient Greek epic poem Thebais, the Thebaid, he traced contemporary history along with facts and symbols that were familiar to the Greeks, treating the ancient Greek tragic poets, the folk song and the δημοτικό τραγούδι of the 12th century, in such a way that the words and deeds narrated in το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού have been widely known for years. During his endeavors to compose a work that would inspire the Greeks, Theodorakis was unintentionally amplifying the dialogue between the laiko song and the classical symphonic genre. This process had already had a long-standing tradition in Western music history, but Theodorakis dedicated himself to also bringing this change to the Greek scene. His ruminations around compositional styles, techniques, and forms that his compatriots would understand led him to the idea of a contemporary laiki tragedy, a totally new musical form, where myth, poetry, tragic heroes, and the chorus would meet. Besides, he was aware that the word τραγούδι, meaning the song, etymologically comes from τραγωδία, which means the tragedy. Yet, what seems more relevant here is that his creative quest into the Aeschylean, Euripidean, and Sophoclean tragedy was apparently making him develop a deeper reflective attitude towards their relationship and sociopolitical engagement. His characters also carry a particular poetic symbolism linked to the ancient Greek tragedy. As the composer stated, although the two brothers are contemporary protagonists, Ismene was inspired by the ancient past as one of the heroines in both Aeschylus' and Sophocles' works, such as Seven Against Thebes, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. In το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού, she once again symbolizes life and love, as well as the sacrifice of a young and innocent soul who does not escape her own fate and leave almost no space for future dreams and personal happiness. Used as a synecdoche, Ismene acts discreetly and her reactions contribute decisively to the plot of the story, as she manages to elevate spectators' minds to the dizzy heights of personal and common responsibility. Although her name recalls a less classically heroic ancient persona than Antigone, her sacrifice in the name of love, justice, and peace still urges Theodorakis to remember the hundreds of thousands of people who were being sacrificed daily in the name of universal peace, but still remained anonymous. Simon Goldhill recognizes that tragedy has another, second perspective of political orientation that prompts and challenges the debate around inner freedom and external necessity, and does not limit itself to aesthetic or philosophical dimensions, but questions human potential towards fate. In this context, the use and presence of the chorus is more than important throughout the performance, especially when the celebration of das Volk in national history comes to the forefront. Theodorakis did not fail to include such a function in το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού. The Mother's Lament, Myroloi, incorporates these elements and establishes the genre of contemporary laiki tragedy brought to the Greek musical scene during the 60s with a clear political orientation. Like ancient drama, this contemporary tragedy was also compressed so as to follow its predecessor in its very substance. Being not only a simple means of entertainment, but mainly one of catharsis. Its main purpose targeted a cleansing of emotions by projecting on stage the experiences and problems of the people. The redemption of man, which always remains in the background, reflects the Aristotelian notion of catharsis, where music also plays a significant part, as its presence reinforces and emphasizes the dramatic and cathartic effectiveness of actors' words and deeds. As Monemvasitis points out, this song cycle could be seen either as a popular drama, opera, or musical. Any of these appellations can apply into the Song of the Dead Brother, but its character is that of contemporary popular tragedy. In this complex work, Mikis Theodorakis blends the ethos of ancient Greek tragedy, the myths and symbols of the modern Greek history, and the structural elements of folk and popular songs. As many of the songs of the musical here were flanked as anthems in the anti-Vietnam War peace movement, both Epitaphios and Το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού belong to the anti-war songs database. This inclusion indicates an acknowledgement of their strong pacifist background, which does not confine them to an autobiographical narration, but encompasses a rather broader setting with universal ideals. Besides, both song cycles have already moved beyond the state of two simple compositions of emotional and national backgrounds, as they have reached the international audience as a means of condemnation of any kind of suppressive regime. For instance, they were performed in a concert held in New York in 1978, as you see on your screen, to honor the dead as a result of the uprising movement against the junta in Greece, and were also an integral part of the exhibition dedicated to Ritsos' and Theodorakis' works against fascism. It is again the poster that you can see on your screen. At the same time, Epitaphios' context had also inspired the posters advertising Theodorakis' recitals at the National University of La Plata and La Forma in 1973 in favor of the condemned, where the original Greek picture was depicted in a modern cubist style that communicates the obscurity, darkness, and madness which this song cycle carries. While being exiled by the colonels, Theodorakis traveled the world, and through his Laikes Synavlies, he also managed to give the Greek problem an international dimension. His struggle for freedom toured Europe, Israel, Canada, the United States of America and Latin America, Australia, Yugoslavia, Lebanon, Tunisia, and Mexico. As he recalls, I have experienced many moments that were very touching and emotional in many countries all over the world because of the nature of my concerts. My concerts were a call for freedom, for struggle, for national, political, and spiritual liberation, for power to the people. They were anti-imperialistic, revolutionary, liberating, and regenerating in character. At the time, my music was associated with major popular movements of all kinds, primarily with anti-dictatorship struggles of peoples oppressed by their rulers, the same way we were, like the Spaniards, the Portuguese, Turks, Palestinians, Iranians, Argentinians, Chileans, and others. Thus, my concerts very often became a platform for the representatives of all those oppressed, who called on the audience to join them in their fight. Epitaphios and το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού were also performed in Israel in 1973, the same year with the Arab-Israeli War, and only 6 years after the 1967 Six-Day War, giving a strong message of freedom for millions of Arabs that had come under Israeli control. This concert is among Theodorakis' significant performances, as his work, and especially the lament in the art folk song, were clearly employed as a means of resistance and hope beyond Europe. It is worth noting that there exist more than 10 official orchestrations for Epitaphios in several styles and instruments, as well as numerous live performances across the globe from the 60s onwards, while it has been officially translated in English in 2014 by Rick Newton. In 2015, and during the cultural celebrations that took place around Greece to honor Theodorakis' musical contribution, the theatrical performance of το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού was reissued by Athanasiou at the Badminton Theatre. However, one of the most noteworthy examples is the arrangement of το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού by the composer Alkis Baltas, which was sung by the Bicommunal Choir for Peace in Cyprus in 2016 as part of the celebrations for the Independence Day of the Cypriot democracy, underlying thus the vision for reunification and solidarity within a divided country, and enhance the common goal of the two communities for peaceful coexistence and respectful unity. By inaugurating the genre of laiki tragedy within the musical landscape, both works presented here address questions and meaningful juxtapositions with the ancient genre that open up new directions for future research, especially with regards to their Euripidean and Sophoclean flavored orientation and heroic ethos. As examples of sorrowful content, both Epitaphios and το τραγούδι του νεκρού αδελφού help their definition of popular culture, communicating a we that moves from individual to universal. Carrying a coalescence of tradition, memory, and thought that define a particular cultural identity, they still operate as a means of resistance and an ever-growing need of expression that has been reinforced thanks to the laikes συναυλίες and album releases around the globe. As the Greek dirge has been disseminated beyond predefined borders through their text translation, recording circulation, concerts, arrangements, and new instrumentation, this kind of consecrated text, as Bourdieu would put it, seemed to acquire a metacultural presence that brings these culturally specific expressions of grief before a broader listenership and transforms them into a universal human experience that still asks to be further discovered. Thank you.
Dr. Athanasiou, σας ευχαριστώ για την υπέροχη παρουσία σας. You've given me personally so much to unpack regarding the art folk song and my own cultural engagement and sense of identity. And the question I'm going to be alert to now when I listen to this Theodorakis compositions, or even simultaneously looking at the poetry, say, of Seferis, and is I'm going to try and be a lot more alert to how Theodorakis managed to activate people's receptives to Hellenic content. It almost feels like, we just receive it. It's beautiful music, the words, but, I'm interested now in the nuances and how he achieved it. You spoke about the metaphysical dimensions of this music, of the compositions. And, you know, you spoke about the political, it being a political vehicle, but also the historical references. I'm interested in the historical references and the role they play in terms of a didactic role today, whether you think that's increasing or not. In Australia, in the diaspora, I'm not sure, and I'd like you to comment on this, or whether you see this as well. The demonic song is almost becoming an entry point for Greek culture and language in the diaspora. You know, especially among young people, not just the music, it gives them an opportunity for a performative, what can we say, performative expression of culture. And, you know, what came through very clearly was Theodorakis' desire to unite the Greek people. Do you see any new emerging metacultural function of this music, of the endichnor art folk song in Greece today? Is the economic situation coming through, or other social tensions? Can you see the beginning of a trend that pertains to contemporary Greek life today?
Definitely. Starting from the historical references that you would like me to comment on, they trace their origins back to the ancient genre of tragedy. As I mentioned, there are clear references to Euripidean and Sophoclean influences. In terms of pedagogical lens, Theodorakis tried to bring these highly regarded cultural expressions of poetry into the wider public in order to make them understandable, and put those words of nobelists in common people who might not have access to such material. He would also like to follow Gramsci's teachings in terms of pedagogy, meaning that his endeavors were around making and educating the Greek people about their own culture and civilization, indicating this kind of transhistorical presence they hold around the globe and within their own cultural presence. He would like to enhance their cultural identity. So I'm not entirely sure if it has repercussions today in terms of economic presence. His main goal was to reinforce the cultural background that every Greek has.
Yeah.
It only remains to every one of us to dig into our history, culture, and realize what exactly we still have. It's not only about being proud about our ancient ancestors, we still have current production and recent people, material that could definitely educate the younger generations.
Well, I mean, you know, I'm glad I used the word unpack then in relation to the form. I really feel I need to go back and even look at my notes that I took as a first-year university student of modern Greek culture when we were taught ton nikru adelphou. And I'm thinking now, it's just amazing that Theodorakis was able to rejuvenate that and make it accessible to so many people.
Exactly. He's usually known for his political songs, and this can be a partial and possibly unfair approach to his overall work, because he has also composed symphonies and oratorios, as for example the Axion Esti by Odysseus Elitis, which are very complex musical forms, not to mention entities that contain poetry in them.
Yeah. When you commenced your talk, Dr. Athanasiou, I was really happy that you elaborated more on the endekto-laiko τραγούδι, because I had a limited understanding about what that meant. You hear that term endekno a lot, and I actually thought it had to do more with the instruments that were used and whether they were electric or not. But and you went into it in such great detail. You know, the Western influence, the compositional techniques. That I don't have a music background, so perhaps I'm deaf to them. But thank you for drawing our attention to all these things that added sophistication, I suppose, to the genre. And yeah, so thank you.
It's also our responsibility as musicologists to make it clear, because there is a great debate about such forms and what exactly they represent. Usually they are just approached from their poetic structure, although they have been set to music and they belong to a particular musical genre, that we need to make people aware of its very substance.
Well, then you will have to come back and speak to us again and help us understand more about these nuances that we're not aware from, people like myself who don't come from a musical background. So thank you so much.
It would be an honor again.
Thank you so much. We wish you ongoing success with your work, and we hope to see you again soon. Καλό Πάσχα.
Thank you so much for... Καλό Πάσχα και σε εσάς.
Yeah, enjoy the rural Greek environment. That is the best for a Greek Easter.
We are waiting for you. Καλό βράδυ και καλημέρα. Γεια σας, χάρηκα.
Yeah.
See you. Bye.